Radio 1090 and FM 101.5.
So the issue of equity politics, racial politics, DEI politics is a topic weekly here on the Jerry Rogers Show. And we've used the term intersectionality often and how it impacts everything from our schools to our corporate boardrooms to our politics to our media. And so I am very pleased to have on the show today William Jacobson. He's a professor at Cornell Law School. He's also the founder of Legal Insurrection. Is it Bill? Is it William? What do you like?
Bill is fine.
All right. Well, Bill, welcome to the program. I appreciate
Thank you.
If you don't mind, tell us what exactly is the intersectionality theory?
So intersectionality is essentially a group identity theory. It started relatively simply as a way in which you can view different forms of discrimination. So it started as an employment law theory. And the theory was, with regard to Black women, that there are two forms of oppression working on them, or two forms of discrimination. One, sex discrimination, and one, race discrimination. So far, it's understandable, but it has morphed into the dominant ideology on campuses and increasingly in radical circles in society. So intersectionality treats everybody by their group identity. And that's what makes it different than our US Constitution, than our state laws, and it makes it different than the whole ethos of the civil rights movement, which treats people as individuals entitled to be treated fairly without regard to race or sex or national origin. So intersectionality orders everything in an oppressor-oppressed ideology and framework based on your group identity. And it therefore orders groups in terms of where they stand in this hierarchy of oppression. And that's the problem with it, because over many years, it has morphed into an anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Israel, some would say anti-Semitic movement, because it classifies capitalism and it classifies the United States as white oppressor societies. And that's what intersectionality is. And it has been picked up throughout campus. I teach at a law school, at Cornell Law School, on a campus, and it is the dominant ideology. It has had various forms over the years. It's critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But at every step of the way, it's ordering oppression, it's ordering group identities, and particularly when it comes to Israel, it is the unifying ideology that harasses Jewish students on campus. I've seen it at Cornell, where when they come with their anti-Israel boycott motions, they always do it as people of color versus white oppressor Israel. And of course, they view the same thing with the United States. That's what intersectionality is. It has morphed even worse into the ideology of terror groups, like you might have seen in the news recently, Turtle Island Liberation Front. I mean, that's a very much an intersectional sort of group. It treats the United States as illegitimate. On every campus almost, there is a so-called land acknowledgement requirement that has to be stated at the beginning of every meeting, acknowledging that we are on stolen land. So at every level, it's oppressor versus oppressed. It is people of color versus whites, and it is to delegitimize the United States, to delegitimize capitalism, and to delegitimize Israel.
You know, it's interesting. We know a couple of things to be true, and that is Rutgers partnering with some other organization recently came out showing that where DEI exists, where essentially where intersectionality exists, where racial equity politics exists, we have seen a rise in racism, in resentment, and the rise of anti-Semitism. So here, my question to you is when we create competing groups rather than a unified society, we no longer have shared values. And what happens to a culture, to a society, when we can't agree on what's shared values? We don't have to agree on all the particulars, all the politics, right? Diversity of opinion, diversity of thought is important. But when we can't simply decide on what's right and wrong, that's dangerous for the cohesion of a culture. Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely. I have two websites that address that issue. One is criticalrace.org, which is an intersectional maps tracking critical race theory in higher education, and the Equal Protection Project, equalprotect.org, which challenges discriminatory practices based on DEI throughout the country. And we've challenged over 275 universities for over 800 programs. So what the DEI programming does is it forces students to identify by group identity. It essentially is a balkanization of our country. It is turning us into the former Yugoslavia, where people are at each other's throats based on your group identity, based on essentially your tribal identity. And that's my big issue with DEI. It's why I've been so outspoken about it at Cornell and elsewhere, which is that it forces students to view themselves not part of a greater whole, the United States of America, in which they fully belong without regard to race, sex, or national origin, and it forces them to compete based on their group identities. We've seen this and we've covered this in K through 12 also. What started on the campuses did not stop on the campuses. DEI and group identity ideology is fully into K through 12 now. There was an incident in the Providence Public School District where we brought a teacher forward, essentially a whistleblower, and she described what the new critical race curriculum did in her school. White teacher teaching in an almost 100% minority district, always got along with the students. But when they introduced the new curriculum, the students no longer viewed themselves as part of the United States. In fact, they refused to stand, many of them, for the Pledge of Allegiance. In Rhode Island, you must recite the Pledge of Allegiance in class, but of course, constitutionally, no student needs to. And they stopped doing that. They started referring to her as America. You're America because you're white. We're not America. That's what it does. If you wanted a way to destroy our country, what would you do differently than the left has done to our education system, where it forces students to view themselves not as part of the greater United States, but as part of their group identity, where it sets group identity students against other group identity students, sets them against their school districts, sets them against their parents, and ultimately sets them against their country. Whoever devised this scheme to force this into the education system knew what they were doing. What would you do differently if you wanted to destroy the United States than what the left has done to education?
You know, I've been saying this. In fact, I said it in the first hour of the program today, that the left is at war with America. The left is at war with Western civilization. It's a kind of cultural revolution. Is the Trump administration having success? Will it have sustained success in undoing or pushing back on this balkanization of this DEI, racial equity, intersectionality?
The Trump administration has taken very important action. The executive orders defunding the DEI industrial complex have been extremely important and very impactful. But we should not kid ourselves. This is an ideology: intersectionality, critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been 30 years in the making. It didn't just happen a couple of years ago. And it's very deeply embedded throughout the campuses, throughout the K through 12 teachers unions, and throughout K through 12, both public and private schools. So this is not something that's going to be won with a half dozen executive orders or a year or two of civil rights enforcement action. Now, the executive orders have been impactful. The civil rights enforcement has been impactful, but you need to change the campus and the K through 12 culture, and that's going to take a lot more time. What we're seeing is the DEI industrial complex, which are the consultants, which are the teachers unions, which are the foundations that fund this, which are the states that in many cases fund it, used to be funded by the US government, not anymore, that they are entrenching themselves. They are circling the wagons. They are hanging on, hoping to wait out the Trump administration. They're hiding things. At our websites where we track this, criticalrace.org and equalprotect.org, We have seen how they are masking things. They're changing names. At Cornell, where I teach, diversity, equity, and inclusion is now called belonging and understanding. It's almost comical, the word games they're playing. They're putting things behind login walls. So we have researchers who research this, and we then bring legal actions. And what used to be on their public-facing websites no longer is. They're taking them down and they're putting them behind paywalls, or I should say login walls, where you need a student ID in order to access the information. So they're masking it by playing word games, they're shuffling people around, and they're hiding things. And therefore, this is going to be a much longer, harder effort than just the Trump administration.
And the theme on this program has been that I argue that the greatest threat to America today is the DEI regime, and broadly the DEI regime, because it creates a circumstance, as you said, where these groups are good, these groups are evil, and it's up to whoever is in charge. They decide who's good and who's evil, and it's a fragmenting. And we see it. There was this past week. Al Sharpton has his organization up in New York City, and all the hopefuls for president were there. Governor Westmore, right here from Maryland, but others, Kamala Harris, and others were there. And a theme of the meeting was, we shouldn't celebrate America's 250th anniversary because America is racist. It was founded on slavery. It's stolen land. And you have men and women running for our nation's highest office, if not nodding in agreement proactively, at least by their presence, are agreeing that America is not worth celebrating. And so, what do you make of this? This is not just, like you said, the radical left on college campuses, but this is now the power structure, the very leadership in the Democratic Party, and in the corporate boardrooms and in our newsrooms. It seems to me they've captured all the positions of power. So my last question to you is there hope?
I think we need to keep fighting it. There's no alternative but to fight this DEI industrial complex, the balkanization of the country, the destruction of the country under an ideology where even publicly elected officials are refusing to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States. We have no choice but to fight it. This is not a battle over education. People need to understand this is a battle over the survival of our country. What they have done to the education system is tearing our country apart at the seams, and it's everywhere. And there is a generation or two of students who have been raised knowing nothing else. They know nothing else about the United States other than the propaganda they've been fed in the educational system. So your question is there hope? I don't think we need to answer that question. We just need to fight it. We just need to stand firmly for the principles of our country, for our system, and for equality, and not for the racism of the DEI industrial complex. That needs to be defeated. Whether it takes 2 years or 20 years, it must be defeated.
Bill Jacobson, Legal Insurrection, Cornell Law School. We're gonna have you back because this, again, I think it is the most important issue facing America today, and I want to fight back, and I want to offer up information and ways in which we can push back. Anyway, Bill, you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. God bless you.
Great, thank you.
All right.